BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden, and Frank Muir. 2 marks if they get the meaning of these words right. And we begin with Anne Scott James. Anne, what is autoplasty?
Well, auto means self, and plasty has something to do with sculpture.
Yeah.
Particularly surgical sculpture.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's when you have a piece of your flesh grafted onto another piece of your body.
Sounds terribly uncomfortable, and you're dead right. 2 marks. Frank Muir, what is a necessitarian?
Well, in the 18th century, a necessary house was what they called a public convenience. So a necessitarian was somebody who was either in need of one or supported the theory of necessary houses or was the attendant therein. A penny for your thoughts.
Well, not much help so far.
It's philosophy.
Yes, that's more like it.
Some kind of philosophy.
It's somebody who denies free will and maintains that all actions of human beings are determined by previous causes. A fatalist, in fact. Dilys Powell, the meaning of exanimate, E-X-A-N-I-M-A-T-E.
Exanimate?
Exanimate.
Well, it used to be alive, but it isn't anymore.
Yes, that's good enough too. Well done. 2 marks. Exanimate means dead or lacking in animation or spiritless. And it is a bit different, as Dilys quite rightly said, from inanimate, which means it never had any life at all, whereas this might have had one once, but died a bit. 2 marks. Denis Norden, what is a polyclinic?
Well, it would be too much to hope that it was a hospital for parrots.
I'm terribly sorry, Dennis, but it would.
Poly in the sense of many.
No, that's what I was trying to warn you
something to do with
all.
the city.
Yes, that's it.
Oh, a clinic for the city. It's
yes,
a clinic
it
that does many purposes. It does not only do clinic, it does pressing.
I'll give you 1.5 because...
Pressing. Yeah.
One of the meanings of it is nowadays is outpatients department of a hospital, which is roughly what Dennis was saying.
Yeah.
But it started by being a clinic in a private house, not in a hospital, roughly a doctor's surgery where he did clinical work. Well, before we begin round 2, what I do is to give each team a quotation for them to write down, and then the 2 women members of the team will go on studying those quotations, because at the end of the programme I shall ask them where the quotations come from. And Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, your quotation is, I could not love thee, dear, so much, loved I not honour more. And Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, yours is, till death us do part. And then at the end of the programme I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their ideas of how these came to be said or written. Well, round 2 is a round of odds and ends, really. 2 marks for correct answers. Anne Scott James, who were the mum and dad of Romulus and Remus?
Well, the foster mother was a wolf.
Yes,
Do I get something for that?
That's fair enough. I want some with 2 legs rather than 4.
Jupiter came into it somewhere.
It's a jolly good guess, and it's wrong.
Oh, no.
I'll give you 0.5 mark for knowing about the she-wolf. That's all right. But the actual parents, as they say, were Mars. The god of war, and the Vestal Virgin, Rhea Silvia. And, of course, being a Vestal Virgin, it oughtn't to have happened to her. And, in fact, she was thrown into the Tiber a bit later on, but luckily bumped against the river god Tiberinus, who married her, so it was all right. Now, Frank Muir, who cut the Gordian knot, and why?
one of those things like splitting the stone in half, wasn't it?
Yes.
If you could do it, therefore the whole world was yours.
Yes.
And you're a better man than I am. Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great cut it because he couldn't be bothered to untie it, so he sliced it through.
Yes. 2 marks it is. Dilys Powell, from whom did America get its name?
Somebody called America.
Not quite.
No, so
Amerigo.
Amerigo?
Amerigo.
Do you remember his surname?
No.
No, he's a terribly friendly
No,
one.
we were very intimate terms. I never learnt his surname.
1.5, I think, for Dilys being on such intimate terms. He was a chap called Amerigo Vespucci, who was a navigator and explorer. There's some doubt as to whether he did, in fact, discover the mainland of America, but he wrote about it all the rest of his life and said he did. It was in the 15th century. Denis Norden, where would you expect to find elephants a-piling teak in the sludgy, squudgy creek?
On the green release of the Limpopo River.
That's a jolly good shot, Denis. You got it wrong, but I mean...
on the grey,
Greasy, is it?
green,
Greasy.
greasy Limpopo River.
Denis, it's verse and not prose, and you've been there before. Funny things happen to the dawn.
Oh, comes up like thunder.
Yes.
On the road to Mandalay, yeah.
Yes. Again, 1.5, because I gave quite a lot of help. The next round's about verse and poetry. What I do is to give each member of each team a quotation and ask them to finish it off for the next line or so. 2 marks if they can complete the quotation, and 2 more if they can name its source. Beginning with Anne Scott James. Shakespeare was of us, Milton was for us, Burns, Shelley were with us, they watch from their graves. He alone breaks from the van and the freemen.
It's just for a handful of
That's
silver
it.
he left us, just for a ribbon to wear. It's Browning,
Yes?
the lost leader.
Yeah. Shakespeare was of us, Milton was for us, Burns, Shelley were with us, they watch from their graves. He alone breaks from the van and the freemen, he alone sinks to the rear and the slaves. 3.5. Frank Muir. The angels not so happy in heaven went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know, in this kingdom by the sea.
Is it?
I think our partner's probably got it.
Annabel Lee? What,
Yes.
Sweet Annabel Lee?
I don't know about sweet.
Annabel Lee.
Yes.
Yes.
Annabel Lee, Jack.
That's absolutely right.
It's a poem, the title of which is Annabel Lee.
Yes. An author? Yes.
Edgar Allan Poe.
I don't think I can get the next 2 lines, so I'll give you 3. Edgar Allan Poe's Annabel Lee. The angels not so happy in heaven went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know, in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud one night, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. It sounds like a sort of deep freeze. It's a rather curious poem. 3 out of 4. Dilys Powell. I chatter over stony ways in little sharps and trebles. I bubble into eddying bays.
It's Tennyson.
Yes.
And it's the brook.
Yes.
And
I babble on the pebbles.
That's it. Got it absolutely right. You get your 4 marks. Denis Norden. Now, this is very difficult to read, but I'll try, Dennis. Our daughters with base-born babies have wandered away in their shame. If your missus had slept, squire, where they did...
Your missus would not have a name. I really don't know this. I don't know what pantomime it comes from.
It's in some of the better anthologies, but I agree it's rather pantomime stuff. 1 for a good last line, Dennis. Not quite as Charles Kingsley intended. It's a poem called The Bad Squire, and it goes on and on. Our daughters with base-born babies have wandered away in their shame. If your missus had stepped, squire, where they did, your missus might do the same. Now a round of origins and derivations. 3 marks if members of the teams can define the present meaning first, and then give me the origin and derivation of these words or expressions or phrases. Anne Scott James, cordon bleu.
Well, currently it means a crack cook.
Yes.
Crack cook.
I should think the blue ribbon, it's like on soie qui malipence. I
Yes,
think
it
it's sort
is.
of early form of the garter in France.
I don't think
I mean, a
it's-
sash, the blue sash that
The later form
Yes.
of garter is
that
the
is an
suspender
honour
belt.
in France. Kings of France used to give a cordon bleu to...
It's now a compliment to a chef or cook who has really become terribly expert. But in France, there was an order of Saint-Esprit, the order of the Holy Ghost, and a knight who became a member of this order wore the blue ribbon, which was the sign of the decoration. It was at one time the highest knightly order in France. Frank Muir, publican.
Publican means the man who runs a pub, or a licensee.
Yes.
Because he has to get a license to do same.
And originally.
Are we back in antiquity?
Yes,
The
back
Bible.
in the New Testament, if you like.
Yes.
Ah, yes.
Scribes, Pharisees,
Yes.
and publicans.
What were they doing?
What were they doing? What were they up to? Money changing?
You're getting there.
Ah. Money changing.
Not quite. It's to do with money, but not
Money.
Tax.
Changing.
The lady in the front row. Tax what?
Tax.
Tax collecting. They're tax collectors. Publicus.
2.5. I helped
Public
you.
houses.
Publican nowadays is a chap who runs a public house, but originally they were the people who were answerable and responsible to the master tax collector who lived in Rome, and these were tax collectors, or better, tax farmers, because they made quite a lot out of it themselves on the side, and often became more or less millionaires, and they were the people who were called publicans. It's very difficult to know why the term shifted from being a tax gatherer, who's not a very popular character, to a chap who's supposed to be the rubicund and cheerful master of a pub. Now, Dilys Powell, to measure swords with someone or to take someone's measure?
Well, it means nowadays to take someone's measure, it means to see how good they are. It must have come from fencing, I should have thought.
And what did you do?
Well, when you started,
You made sure his wasn't longer than yours.
Exactly. You
The old
had-
joke.
Might have been using a lance.
3 marks. Nowadays, measuring swords with somebody means trying to find out whether somebody is strong enough to match himself against you with any chance of success. But this was the job which the seconds in a duel had in order to prevent unfairness. They measured the two swords so that one wasn't conspicuously 2 or 3 feet longer than the other, which would have been pretty unfair to the other chap who hadn't got it.
What do they do with pistols?
I don't know about that. I think he was stood at a distance. It didn't matter all that much if one had a longer
Well,
barrel.
it did to one person.
Especially if the other one had a sword.
Now, Denis Norden, what does the expression a king log or king log mean?
King log. Oh, that's one of these obscure fables, isn't it?
Yes,
With frogs come into it somewhere. don't
they do.
It's a fable. A king log is, I should think, is something that looks like a king, but is actually inert and
Yes.
incapable of doing anything.
Yes, yes.
And it comes from some rotten fable. I don't know whose it is.
1.5. King log is somebody who rules or manages something quietly or peaceably without making his power or authority too conspicuously felt. And there was a fable of the frogs who wanted a king, and they asked the king of the gods, Zeus, for a king to rule over them. He just threw down a log, and as Denis said, this didn't give them very much excitement. I mean, they just lay about there. So that they grumbled a lot at having a king who did so little work. So next time, Zeus sent them down a stalk, and the stalk ate them all up.
Soppy fable.
You put them in, you get them out.
And now we come to the last round. I'll go back to those 2 quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme. For 2 marks, Anne Scott James, can you give me the origin of the quotation, I could not love thee, dear, so much, loved I not honour more?
Well, it's an ode or lyric by Lovelace.
Yes. Richard Lovelace, the Cavalier poet, to Lucester on going to the wars, I could not love thee, dear, so much, loved I not honour more. Now, Dilys Powell, will you give me the origin of your quotation, till death us do part?
It occurs in the marriage service.
Yes, 2 marks. And now I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their explanation of how these quotations came into being, and on this occasion the marks will go to whichever incredible explanation receives the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Denis Norden and his quotation, I could not love thee, dear, so much, loved I not honour more.
I once had a very exhausting experience with a tall girl. The girl's name was Kit. I met her when I was living in Yorkshire, and I was a member of the Ilkley Moor Lawn Tennis Club, and she was the girls' singles champion. She'd been single longer than any other girl in the club, you see, simply because of her height. She was 6'8". It really looked as if love would pass Kit by, except that she had this great stroke of luck. She sprained her ankle when she was vaulting the net. And I must point out that with that height, the net she used to vault was the one that went round the court. And because of this unfortunate accident, this sprain, she had to use a wheelchair. And it was while she was doing the period, well, she was in the wheelchair that Rodney Carfax applied for membership of the club. He was, of course, immediately accepted because we, at that time, were rather short of players who could serve overarm. But the moment Rodney came in and saw Kit sitting in the chair, that was it, you know, and all through the ensuing Yorkshire area championships, they were inseparable. So while I was on the court, I went over to Kit and I said, is there anything between you? Because I was curious, because he was 4'5". So one does ask, you know, is there anything between you? And her face sort of clouded over, and she said, yes, 2'3". I said, well, obviously he doesn't mind that. She said, he doesn't know. So I said, well, what do you mean? She said, he hasn't yet seen me standing up. I said, well, that's awkward. Which, of course, it is. And I said to her, do you think that he's serious? And she said, yes, he's very serious. He told me that as soon as I can go back on my feet, he wants to take me for a walk over Ilkley Moor and propose. And I said, well, when will that be? And she said, well, I'm just sort of spinning it out. She said, he's beginning to wonder a bit, you know, how a sprained ankle can go on for 5 months. I said, that's terrible, because she was obviously very fond of him. I said, wait a minute. I said, tonight is a moonless night, isn't it? I tell you what you do. When he comes off court, you tell him that the surgeon is going to take the cold compress off this afternoon, and that you will meet him over on Ilkley Moor at 10 o'clock, which he did. And you know what I did? I conscripted the whole of the tennis club, and we went out to the moor, and we dug a trench. We dug a trench 1/4 mile long and exactly 2'3" deep. And when Rodney arrived at 10 o'clock, she was standing in it. And he kissed her. He only had to lean forward, not up, and took her hand, and they walked off together into the night. And thanks to the darkness, you see, he couldn't perceive that she was actually, as it were, 1 floor below. Now, you may say, well, he was bound to find out eventually. He did. But he only found out because she confessed. But she confessed in such a poetic way that he forgave her, and they're still happily married now. Because in the middle of a caress, she suddenly stopped and said to him, "You could not love me, dear, so much. Loved I not on a moor."
And I was so afraid it wasn't going to have a happy ending. Well, now we come back to Frank Muir, and if you remember, his quotation was, "Till death us do part."
The Victorians had a saying, "Every picture tells a story." And I've often wondered whether the stories that we've given these paintings were in fact what was intended. So I started some investigations, and very revealing they've been, not to say riveting. You know that one in the Tate Gallery? It's the one of the naval scene of the engagement off Tenerife in 1802. There are the ships of the line, and there's this longboat being rowed by this rather stout girl. And there's the young naval captain, and he's clasping her, and shot and shell is about to sink the boat. And the title of the picture is, "Till Death Us Do Part." Terribly romantic. Well, I made some investigations, and that isn't, in fact, the story of that picture at all. It isn't romantic, but it's a story of steadfast duty. I researched this. It took me a long time at the Maritime Museum in Greenwich. And the people in this story consisted of Captain Horatio Wilson, who was one of the youngest captains in the British Navy in 1802. His nickname was Tim. Apparently, at the third pip, he was... At the third pip, he was 12 precisely. They were always very much younger in those days. By the time he was about 19, he was in command of a frigate of the line. Now, the girl in the boat, apparently his friend, was called Emma Hambleton. Now, Emma Hambleton was employed on the ship. They used to in those days. The captains used to have their girlfriends and wives aboard. And she was employed to holystone down the deck. There was also on board the frigate a very dim powder monkey called Sid, whom I'll come to later. Now, not actually on this ship, but in this story, there was the Rear Admiral Shovel, a relation of the famous Sir Cloudesley Shovel, and Rear Admiral Shovel's job was to command the first ship in the line, and Admiral Nelson comes into it a bit later. Now, what happened was, in this engagement in the Azores, Captain Horatio Wilson, our hero, commanded the last boat in the line, and he had Lord Nelson on board with him. And at one critical stage, just as the French fleet were coming alongside, Nelson rapped out. He was much younger, he was 5. He turned round to Captain Horatio Wilson and said, "Make a signal to Sir Cloudesley Shovel in the leading vessel. Turn to port." Now, this presented Captain Horatio Wilson with a dilemma, because he knew that Nelson didn't. That, in fact, Rear Admiral Shovel was deaf. Now, this had come about because on an inspection of Wilson's ship some week earlier, the usual Admiral's inspection, he got a twinge of gout in his larboard leg, and he'd asked to see the Surgeon Commander Farr. And so they called for this dim powder monkey Sid, Wilson did, and said, "Where's Surgeon Commander Farr?" And Sid, the dim powder monkey, paled and said, "I've shoved him up the barrel of one of the guns." So Captain Wilson said, "Why did you do that?" And Sid said, "Well, you said, shove the ammo up the gun." Whereupon the Rear Admiral Shovel put his head near the gun, looked in the barrel and shouted, "Farr!" Whereupon the dim powder monkey Sid applied match to taper So Rear Admiral Shovel was deaf. So consequently, when Nelson said, make a signal to him to turn to port, Captain Horatio Wilson ordered the longboat to be lowered. Now, he couldn't row, but he knew Emma Hamilton, this rather stout girl, was a very good rower. So he commanded her into the boat and said, row forwards towards the front of the fleet. Because as he rowed, the French fleet closed up, peppered him with shot and shell. The little longboat started to sink. And he clasped Emma in his arms, hoping that she would swim ashore with him. That's why. So what he was shouting out in this brave way, as depicted in this picture, was not this romantic, till death us do part. He was shouting to that forward ship, tell deaf ears to port!
Well, Frank Muir will never dare visit Greenwich again after that one. By your vote, Denis Norden wins the contest of the two stories, but nevertheless, the team of Dilys, Powell and Frank Muir win the complete contest. And that also brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Dilys Powell, Frank Muir, Anne Scott James, and Denis Norden. And here's round one to try and test their vocabularies. 2 marks if they get the meaning of these words approximately right. Dilys Powell, what's the meaning of megacephalic?
Big-headed.
Yes? Literally?
Yes, literally.
All right, good. 2 marks it is. Means you have a big head. I'm told it has to exceed 1,450 cubic centimetres, but I'm not quite certain what that goes for. But it means big-headed. Now, Denis Norden, what is a petiole?
A petiole is a term used in the making of Gruyere cheese, which, as you know, is made in France, and you can have the petiole or the grandole. To choice, à choix, as they say. Other than that, it's
no
either
marks so far, no.
a musical instrument
It sounds
Or
very
a
like
dance, do you think?
or a dance.
No, I don't think so. I don't give you any marks at all. It's
spike.
the stalk of a leaf stalk, as opposed to a peduncle, which is the main stalk, which has a flower or leaves on it. And just for purposes of accuracy, Gruyere is made in Switzerland, not France.
That's where I went wrong.
Anne Scott James. The meaning of the word morbific.
Well, it's something to do with disease.
Yeah.
It's a disease, something which carries disease, I should think.
Yes, I think that's good enough. It's causing disease, making disease, Latin word, verb to make. Morbific, causing disease, 2 marks. Frank Muir, what is a lavrock?
It's a
bird.
It's a what? Oh, don't be silly.
Try bird.
Bird.
Yes, it is a bird.
It is a bird. It is a bird. Oh, it's a bird.
Yes, I don't get you halfway there. I want to know which bird.
Oh.
Lark.
Lark.
A lavrock is a lark. The bird, not sort of sense of fun. Well, before we begin round two, I give each team a quotation for them to write down, and I want the two women members of the two teams to go on studying those quotations, because at the end of the programme I shall ask them where the quotations come from. And Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, your quotation is, "For men may come and men may go, but I go on forever." And Anne Scott James and Denis, here's yours. "Better to love amiss than nothing to have loved." And amiss is spent in one word and not two. And at the end of the programme, I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their idea of how these came to be said or written. Round two is a round of odds and ends, 2 marks again for correct answers. Notice, Powell, what's the difference between a griffin and a griffon? Griffin and then the same but on. Griffin and griffon.
A griffin, I-N, is a fabulous creature with a kind of knob on the end of its nose and wings.
Yes,
And 4 legs, I think.
yes.
And a griffon has 4 legs, it's much smaller, and it has no knob on its nose, and it's a very small dog.
I think that's good enough. 2 marks. Denis Norden, if you went into a restaurant and asked for Königin Suppe, what would you get?
Depends which restaurant. You see, if you went into a Chinese restaurant, you'd get a very strange look. Presumably, if you went into a German restaurant, you'd get a Suppe or soup.
Yes.
Oh, what was the other bit?
Königin.
Königin. You'd have soup with a Königin.
It is a German soup, and you would need probably to go to a German restaurant to get this, but it's the German name for cream of chicken soup. Now, Anne Scott James, where would you expect to find stucco, and what is it?
Oh, you'd find it on the outside of a house.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a rather, although it's quite old, it's a rather sort of cement-like looking thing.
Yes.
What's it technically? Which is put on soft.
Yes.
And then dries with a hard surface.
That's right. Yes, that's good enough. 2 marks. Now, Frank Muir, this is very different. What is teapot acting?
Teapot acting.
Teapot acting.
It was much developed in between the wars and for a few years after, when at matinees tea trays were served. And it meant an extra declamatory style.
Yeah.
It meant a stronger voice from the actor in order to overcome the tinkle of teapot spout against teacup.
Yep. You've got it about half right, Frank, but it's try looking like a teapot.
Find that difficult, Jack. I can look like a milk jug in the right mood.
Any help? No?
No.
Never mind. 1 out of 2 for knowing it's something to do with the theatre of that kind, and declamatory style is what I'm giving you a mark from. But it was this was a contemptuous term for a particular way in which actors stood, particularly serious and tragic actors in the 18th and 19th century. They put one hand on one hip with the elbow stuck well out, and that, of course, was the handle of the teapot, and the other was raised in a most graceful curve rather high up, and that was the spout. And the actor, meanwhile, went on pouring out speech after speech in a very measured and chanting way. Teapot acting. Next round is origins and derivations, and 3 marks this time, if members of the team can first of all give me the present meaning and then give me the origin and derivation of these words or expressions or phrases. Beginning with Dilys Powell again. Dilys, bombast.
It means a very exaggerated and over-dramatic form of language.
Mm-hmm. Talking, yes.
Talking big.
Yes, talking big, that's what I wanted.
Talking big.
Do you know what it comes from? It's very odd.
Haven't the faintest idea. Not a notion. Have you?
1.5.
No.
Nowadays, bombast is inflated, boastful talk, somebody who is very conceited and talks at great length about himself, usually. Bombast originally means the produce of the bombyx, or silkworm, and then by mixture of words, it came to mean cotton, and therefore, in particular, the cotton or cotton wool used for padding. The French word bombas became padding, and padding, when you're talking in an inflated way about yourself, means you're puffing yourself up. 1.5. Denis Norden, terrier.
It's a dog. It's a brand of dog.
Mm-hmm.
And what does it come from? Comes from a mummy dog and a...
Oh, earth, do you think?
Earth, yeah, tear.
Well, from hunting, you send a terrier down the hole when a fox has run to earth.
That's it. 3 marks it is. Terrier now covers a great many breeds of dog, and probably some mongrels as well, I suppose. But originally it was digging dogs, which went to earth, or unearthed their prey. And the word terrier, French word, originally meant the burrow, and this was the chien terrier, or the digging dog, which rooted out foxes and badgers and rabbits and so on. And Scott James, Cimmerian darkness.
Comes from Greek.
Yeah.
A Greek origin, which must have been,
What's it mean now?
Oh, it just means utter total darkness.
Yes.
It must have been hell, I think. Cimmerian...
Probably not, but...
Homer?
Yes, it's in Homer.
But I simply...
Don't look at me, I'm... You know, I still didn't know that Gruyere cheese came from Switzerland.
Did they live in caves or something?
Sorry?
Did they live in caves?
This'll do it. Anyway, 2.5. It means very thick, gloomy darkness, which goes on forever, and can mean darkness of the spirit as well as physical darkness. But these were chaps called the Cimmerians. Oh, according to Homer, they lived in perpetual darkness and beyond the ocean stream. Therefore, they may have been possibly Eskimos who have a lot of night. But Anne's also right. There's a book by Michael Ayrton, the Maze Maker, in which he does put his Cimmerians underground. They lived in pretty black kind of caves, and they were metal workers and craftsmen generally. All right, 2.5. Frank Muir, pocket battleship.
Pocket battleship. These were the things the Germans built to sort of sneak in under the ropes of a treaty after the 1914-18 war, which limited the maximum tonnage of their capital ships. So they crammed into the maximum tonnage that they were permitted the rather over the normal armoury of that sort of vessel.
Yep, absolutely right. 3 marks. Next round is the who, why, and what department. 2 marks again for correct answers. Dilys Powell, what, romantically speaking, is or was bachelor's fare? F-A-R-E. Bachelor's fare.
Well, it can't have been very elaborate if he cooked it himself.
No.
Bread and cheese, I should
Yes,
think.
that's most of it. I want the romantic bit.
Romantic bit.
You've got 2/3 of it.
Really?
Can't
Bread,
be
cheese and beer.
Can't be onions.
No, not... cider, beer, wine,
No.
tea, coffee,
No.
cocoa.
These are
Cheese
these are
and
much
kisses.
too corporeal and
Kisses?
substantial. What?
Kisses.
Yes. Well done. 2 marks it is. Bachelor's fare is bread and cheese and kisses. And it comes in Jonathan Swift. Ladies were inviting themselves to breakfast with a bachelor colonel and asked what they would get to eat. And he said, "I' faith, madam, bachelor's fare, bread and cheese and kisses."
Breakfast.
Denis Norden, what are the names given to the husband, the wife, and the offspring of a seal? And a bonus mark if you know what the actual breeding place is called as well. Male, female, and small seal.
Well, the husband is the Lord Privy Seal. Don't they call it a bull and a cow?
Yes, quite right. And the young, it's rather more difficult, this.
Calf?
No, it isn't curious enough.
I don't know. Where they
Under seal.
And but where you find all this going on, you were just about to say that.
That's called a ceiling.
Oh, that's, I see the actual...
Oh, 1.5 out of 2 did jolly well. For some very odd reason, the male seal is called a bull, the female seal a cow, and the child is called a pup. And again, very oddly, the breeding ground is called a rookery. They don't actually fly, but that's what it's called. All right, 1.5. And Scott James, how did the word grotesque get its meaning?
Well, the only word that sounds at all like it is grotto, but it's spelt with 2 T's, and grotesque is spelt with 1.
Doesn't matter.
Well, now, what was a grotto? It was a rather Gothic-style cave where delights and oddities happened, and Spanish moss
or if
dripped.
you were digging up Pompeii, if you were digging up Pompeii, what would you find?
You'll find that poor sentry, what got overcome with lava.
No, he's a red herring sentry. There's no help at all. I don't know. Half a mark. The rooms of ancient Roman buildings, which were dug up and revealed in medieval times in Rome, were called grottos, which simply meant a vault. And the walls were decorated with all sorts of fantastic paintings and drawings and ornaments, very unconventional, sometimes fairly outre. And that style of decoration came to be known as grotesque. And it's grotesque after the grotto in which it was found. Half a mark, I think. Frank Muir, what was Big Bertha, and why was it so called?
Going back to my era, pre-war, Big Bertha was a dirty great gun, which was built by the Germans in the 1914-18 war, my speciality, it seems, to shell Paris, which it did with to minor effect. And it's called Big Bertha because there was a Mrs. Bertha Krupp who was supposed to have built the gun, and it was on wheels. It was built on a railway. It was part of a railway truck.
Yes.
And was actually moved about on a railway.
Jolly good. 2 marks to 2. Well, now we come to the last round and go back to those quotations I gave the 2 teams earlier in the programme. For 2 marks, Dilys Powell, can you give me the origin of your quotation? For men may come and men may go, but I go on forever.
It's a poem by Tennyson called The Brook.
Yes, quite right. 2 marks it is. And I and Scott James, the origin of your quotation, please. Better to love amiss than nothing to have loved.
Well, it says the same, but it's just the wrong rhythm as better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. Which is Tennyson. Won't that do?
Nope.
But this is earlier, 17th century English poet whom I cannot name.
Well, I think 2.5 marks for the century. We'll do a benefit for you next week.
Yes.
Better to love amiss than nothing to have loved is the 18th century poet George Crabbe, and it's in a poem called Struggles of Conscience. It seems a bit tough.
Difficile.
Yes, I think it was a difficult one. And now I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their explanation of how these quotations came into being. And on this occasion, the marks will go to whichever unlikely explanation receives the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Frank Muir and his quotation. For men may come and men may go, but I go on forever.
For my lecture this evening, during the next 40 or 50 minutes, I'm going to tell you all there is to know about human hair. Now, hair was not put there for fun. Hair has a purpose. For one thing, it protects the skull, where the brains are, from nuts and bolts which might drop off passing aircraft. It also stops you lacerating the tender skin of your head when you are worried, and scratch your head. Think for a moment what life would be like without hair. Ladies, do you realize that without hair, hat pins wouldn't work? That a lady's crowning glory would be her eyebrows. Hair is an important thing. It always has been. It is famed in phrase and fable and in history. And our own national bard, Dear William, Mr. Shakespeare. I mean, in Henry V, when Henry V wanted to rally the troops on the battlefield, did he say, follow the lovable king? Did he say, follow me, I'm noble and virtuous? No, he said, cry Harry for England and St. George. Hair has always had mystical qualities for antiquity. I want to conclude this lecture, telling you all about the human hair, by a word of caution about the care and maintenance of the hair. Do not yield to the blandishments of advertising. Do not pour unguents and lotions upon the hair, therefore hoping it will increase and multiply. It will not. You can't even grow a beard by the use of ointments. You grow a beard because the holes in the chin are larger than the holes in the top of the head. And therefore, when the hair is forcing out, it comes downwards and goes up. You cannot improve the hair by brushing and combing it. You cannot. The thing to do is to walk around lightly on the balls of the feet in a moist atmosphere. Now, the Victorians knew this. Who was the hairiest Victorian that you know? Alfred, Lord Tennyson. Alfred Lord Tennyson, the poet. He had big holes in his head, and he had big holes in his chin, and big holes in his upper lip, and hair came out all over him. A magnificent head of hair. But Alfred Lord Tennyson eschewed brushing and combing. Alfred Lord Tennyson eschewed pouring on gooey creams and things. Whenever he wanted to relax, whenever he wanted to grow his hair in peace, he took a punt on the River Thames. He loved the River Thames. In fact, he says so. He gives advice to everybody interested in the human hair. He says, have nothing to do with brush and comb. Have nothing to do with gooey ointments. They won't do any good. Just get on the river and you're fine. I can give you, if you like, the actual quotation of Tennyson. Would you like? Anyone for Tennyson? He said, when they asked him about his head of hair, he said, why is it so good? He said, men may comb and men may goo, but I go on the river.
I still have a little curiosity left as to whether Tennyson had hair on his chest as well. We'll get him. Now back to Denis Norden, and if you remember, his quotation was, better to love amiss than nothing to have loved.
I wish to give no offence at all to all the ladies present and listening when I say that, to me, the most chilling description that can be given of any woman is that she is house-proud. The phrase that you often hear applied to such a lady, oh, she keeps the house spotless, you could eat off her floor. But why I'm particularly tender on this point, because I lost a very dear friend because of a house-proud woman, a friend of mine called George Crampton, who was married to a house-proud lady. Now, when I say house-proud, I mean really house-proud. I only visited him once, and I should have been warned at the very moment when he opened the door to me. Now, have you ever seen a house that is run by a house-proud lady? The shine on everything, we went in the kitchen. It was immaculate. You could have performed a surgical operation in there. I said, how do you keep it like this? And she said, I have a system. And I said, what system? And George said, we have all our meals out. But you see, the house proudness extends beyond mere cleanliness. It goes to decorating everything that can possibly be decorated. Do you understand what I mean? You know that little light inside the fridge? She had a frilly lampshade. You know that round window on the washing machine? Chintz curtains. But the cleanliness thing was the paramount one. George nudged me as we went through the hall. There was a cuckoo clock. She'd laid a sheet of newspaper. The agony only really started, though, when we went in the sitting room. I embarked on some anecdotes. I was in the middle of them, and I suddenly noticed George making frantic signals. Without being conscious of it, I had lit a cigarette. Her voice came. Are you smoking, Mr. Norden? I said, no, it's the cigarette, actually. She said, what do you intend to do with the ash? I said, well, I was thinking of swallowing it. She said, well, please don't go to any trouble. She said, do what George does. Put it in the roadway. The evening seemed interminable. And I think the final evidence of George's servitude to this kind of thing came as he was bidding me good night. Because he turned to his wife and he said, darling, have you cleaned the sink for the night? And she said, yes. Why? He said, nothing. I just fancied a glass of water. Never mind. It'll do in the morning. 3 days later, he hanged himself. I couldn't blame him. There really was nothing for him to live for. I only rejoiced that he had a sort of posthumous victory, because the room in which he hanged himself was the living room. He stands for me ever as an example of a quotation which, in the words of George Crabbe, if I may change it a little, render it a sort of dressed crab, he stands an example of better to love a mess than nothing to have lived.
That's the most terrifying story I've ever heard in my life. And by your vote, Denis Norden wins the contest of the two stories, but on the other hand, Dilys Powell and Frank Muir win the entire contest, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. Here's round one to try and test their respective vocabularies. 2 marks if they get the meaning of these words approximately right. We begin with Anne Scott James. Anne, what is the meaning of polythalamus? Polythalamous, polythalamus.
Well, the poly part means many.
Yes.
And the thalamus part means something to do with the bridal chamber, so it means somebody who's rather promiscuous, I should think, or has many many bridal rooms, chambers.
Cut out honeymoon hotel.
Cut out the bridal on your right.
Well, with many rooms.
That'll do. 2 marks. It's having many rooms or chambers, though it's not usually used of well-known hotels. It's a natural history term, normally. Of course, that might count, too. I don't know. Frank Muir, what is a muchacha?
A muchacha, Jack, is a South American dance, danced by old cows. But it is South American, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, it could be South American.
Who is that, muchacha? It's a girl. It's a muchacha, as a thing from a muchacho.
Yes, that's
There's
it.
a he muchacha.
Yes.
One's a
right.
girl and one's a boy.
This'll do. 2 marks. Now, Dilys Powell. Dilys, what is the meaning of colubrine?
Nothing to do with colibri, which is a snake.
Yes.
Snaky.
Snaky?
Snaky.
Snaky, that'll do. Snake-like. Colubrine. It can mean snaky as well, or cunning. Yes. 2 marks it is. Denis Norden, what is zootomy?
Well, it's zootomy. You don't think I don't know, don't you? It's the art of testing the bathwater with your elbow. You say it, well, I don't know, it doesn't feel so odd to me. Otomy is something that's... Anything that's otomy is cutting up. It's rather nasty.
Yes.
It's cutting up a zoo.
Denis, you don't need the whole zoo.
Cutting up animals.
Cutting up animals.
Yes, all right, that's quite right. 2 marks it is. Zootomy is the dissection or anatomy of animals other than man, which is a help.
Woman.
I don't think so. I think she comes in under the general heading men. It's tough. 2 marks. Well, before we begin round 2, I give each team a quotation for them to write down, and I want the 2 women members of each team to go on studying those quotations during the rest of the programme, because at the end I shall ask them where the quotation comes from. And Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, your quotation is, "The concessions of the weak are the concessions of fear." And Dilys Powell and Frank, yours is, "Stone walls do not a prison make." And then at the end of the programme I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their idea of how these came to be said or written. Well, the next round's about verse and poetry, and what I do is to give each member of each team a quotation and ask them to complete it with the next line or 2. 2 marks if they can finish the quotation, and 2 more for correctly naming the source. Anne Scott James, "Oh, the girl that I loved, she was handsome. I tried all I knew her to please."
That's a song.
Yes.
He flies through the air with the greatest...
Yes. The damn young man on the flying trapeze.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's all right. 4 marks. It's quite likely traditional, but in one book it's given to a chap called George Laybourne and the music by Alfred Lee, but it's correct, I think, enough to say that it's traditional. Frank Muir, "When I was a bachelor, I lived by myself and I worked at the weaver's trade. The only thing that I ever did wrong was to woo a fair young maid. I wooed her in the winter time and in the summer too."
This is filthy. It's one of these smutty folk songs. We at the BBC are trying to stamp in. It's, the only thing I ever did wrong was keep her from the foggy, foggy dew.
Yes, that's good enough, 4 marks. I wooed her in the winter time and in the summer too, and the only thing I ever did wrong was to keep her from the foggy, foggy dew. Anonymous, I think. 4 marks. Dilys Powell, and they bought a pig and some green jackdaws and a lovely monkey with lollipop paws and 40 bottles of ringbow ree and no end of Stilton cheese.
It's Edward Lear.
Yes?
Is it the Jumblies?
Yes.
The Jumblies. They went to see in a sieve, they did.
Yes.
And sieve they went to see, and I really... Oh, where are we now? What is that?
Yes, it's just I wanted to do the next bit. And no end of Stilton cheese. Far and few.
Something about their hands were green. No, I don't know.
Yes, that's right.
Their hands were green.
They were. No, I helped quite a lot. Two and a half, I think. Edward Lear, the Jumblies, their heads are green and their hands are blue. And they went to sea in a sieve. 2.5. Denis Norden. Charlotte was a married lady and a moral man was Werther.
Oh, yeah. This is always in all the books of comic verse. And it's something about he was born home on a shutter somewhere.
Yes.
And I don't... Is it C.S. Calverley? It's some kind of 19th century...
19th century, yes. Little
comic
earlier,
verse writer. I honestly don't know.
Try and finish off the verse, if you can, Dennis. Charlotte was a married lady and a moral man was Werther.
All I can remember is somebody was born on a shutter. Or born home on a shutter. He wasn't... he didn't begin life on a shutter.
I think 1 mark for knowing how the story went. This is Thackeray, The Sorrows of Werther, and he was guying Goethe, this is rather difficult, the German poet, who wrote a great romantic thing about the sorrows of Werther. And it runs, Charlotte was a married lady and a moral man was Werther, and for all the wealth of Indies would do nothing for to hurt her. 1 mark.
Oh, and he also said that she kept on carving butter or something.
That's right, she did, that's it. Now a round of origins and derivations. 3 marks if you can define the present meanings and then give me the origin and derivation of these words or expressions or phrases. Anne Scott James, desert rats.
Well, it comes from the last war,
Yes.
in the Desert War in North Africa.
Yes.
And the desert rats were the British troops in Libya.
Why were they called desert rats, and who called them that first?
Rommel.
No, it wasn't Rommel. You're getting right, you're getting near it.
Well, the Germans called them desert rats as a term of abuse, and then they sort of adopted it with pride.
It was used, yes, it's absolutely right, but it was used before the Germans got there. We were fighting somebody else first.
The
Italians.
Oh dear, I don't know how many to give you. 2. Desert Rats was the nickname for the 7th Armoured Division, which was already in the Western Desert before the outbreak of the war, and served with the 8th Army right the way through the North African campaign and afterwards right on into northwestern Europe. And its divisional sign was this red desert rat on a black background. There was also the 4th Armoured Brigade, which had also been in the desert a long time. They used a black rat on a white background. But the name was originally given by Mussolini in an insulting sense, and the division then adopted the words proudly, and of course rather sort of saw Mussolini off. 2 marks. Frank Muir, leaves of a book. Why are they called leaves?
Well, the biggest one's called a folio.
Yes?
Which is presumably the same root as foliage.
Yes?
Papyrus was a leaf, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right.
It was a leaf of a reed.
Yes. Well.
So presumably uncouth chaps, hadn't learned how to make paper, tread trees and add glue and stuff, used to write on leaves.
Yes, you are actually right. Well, obviously, the leaves of a book are its pages, but before paper was invented, one of the things you used to write on was the leaves of certain plants. And as Frank rightly said, a folio, which now means a sheet of paper numbered in the front, or the double sides of a big ledger, comes from the Latin word folium, a leaf. Dilys Powell, acme, A-C-M-E, acme. Present meaning and derivation.
Means the top.
Yes.
I know where it
It's a
comes
Greek
from.
word.
Yes.
I know where it comes from.
Do you? Come on, then.
It comes
Yes.
from the Duke of Monterosa's dying words, just before he was executed. He said, "Do not act me as you did my Lord Russell."
You've got the present meaning, and you've got which Greek word it comes from, but it does mean something else, and this is rather medical. Acme. I'm not going to get it. 1.5.
No.
Acme means the highest pitch and comes from a Greek word meaning the highest point. But it was originally the term used by medical writers for the crisis of a disease, and they divided the progress of a disease into a number of stages, all of which had Greek names. The first was arche, or the beginning of the disease. Then there was the anabasis, or increase of the disease. Acme was just the absolute top of the disease when it was at its utmost violence. And then paracme was the decline, so that was the highest point you reached, and you either survived or you died. Denis Norden, to strip to the buff.
Well, it means take all your clothes off, Jack.
Yes. But why?
Well, to have a bath. On that I will not be drawn.
For instance.
To have a bath. And the buff. Well, why should it be the buff?
You're buffing your nails.
That's what I was thinking, to the polished bit. You
No,
don't
that's
have any
that's
polished bits that you
that's-
strip to.
Oh, something to do with buffo, is it? The Italian word?
Buffo, yeah.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
buffo, you know that.
It's a French word. It comes from.
French.
But-
Buff, to strip to the beef. That's what
Yes.
it is. You
Yes,
strip
you're
to the
getting there.
flesh, the meat.
Yes.
Buff. You see, the ros, you know,
Yes, but-
if you're suntan, it's ros beef.
It means, as Denis says, to strip to the bare skin, but buff was the name given to a soft but quite strong leather prepared from the skin of the buffalo. That was the word I was trying to get out of you. And hence to any light-coloured leather. And because it was light-coloured leather that you said buff meant
I
skin.
don't think we'd have got there.
Now, the who, why, and what round, 2 marks again. And Scott James, who comes to mind when you hear the expression, the Flanders mare, and why?
She married. Was she one of Henry
Henry
VIII's many wives?
It's Anne of Cleves.
Anne of Cleves.
Yes. Anne of Cleves was Henry VIII's 4th wife, and when he saw her, he'd seen a rather flattering picture of her first, and she didn't live up to the specification.
Well, she must have
And
been divorced then.
He hated her, married her in January, and divorced her in July, but she ended quite luckily, because unlike a good many of the rest, she lived on to die in Chelsea, I think, in 1557. 2 marks. Frank Muir, another question connected with another very monarch. When Edward VII was Prince of Wales, and indeed I think afterwards, he was fond of attending shooting parties. He always used to shout out, "Where's the boy?" What did he mean?
Dilys has written rather illegibly, champagne.
Yes? Quite right.
What's that got to do with the
Did.
boy?
He cried, boy, bring the champagne.
Yes?
Were you there?
Yes.
All right, 2 marks. When Edward VII said, "Where's the boy?" or shouted, "Where's the boy?" he meant, "Where's the champagne?" And what happened then was that a boy with an iced bucket of champagne would be rushing in, and every time that Edward VII grew thirsty, this is what he shouted. So that for a short time, this was what champagne was called. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, what do you know about doodling?
Well, it's what I've been doing all this time. Just scribbling on a bit of paper.
And where does it come from? Where does it first turn up?
Well, I've heard it said that it had first occurred in a film.
Yes? Which film? After the play.
Yankee Doodle. No, that wasn't
Mr. Deeds. Mr. Deeds. Mr. Deeds comes to town.
Yes, that's right, yes. It was used in another sense by the Scots. It meant then, doodling, playing the bagpipes, because the bagpipe was called the doodle sack. 2 marks. Denis Norden, who or what was Pongo?
It's either what the soldiers call the Marines, or it's what the Marines call the soldiers. They call them pongos, don't
Yes,
they?
Marine, you're dead right. But I don't think it was the soldiers who said that.
The Navy.
Oh,
Yes,
regular
that's right.
Navy.
Yes.
Yes, I think that's good enough. 2 marks. It does, in fact, mean quite a lot of things. It meant originally a large anthropoid African ape, and then a Sherman's monkey. And I think this was being rude to the Marines, and that's why the sailors called the Marines Pongo. It was also used of Australian infantrymen in the First World War. And there, apparently, it was after an Aboriginal name for a flying squirrel. Now we come to the last round and go back to those quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme. For 2 marks, and Scott James, can you give me the origin of your quotation? The concessions of the weak are the concessions of fear.
Well, there's tremendous political pronouncements, usually apt to be Burke.
Yes? This was Edmund Burke speaking on the American colonists who'd rebelled against England. And Dilys Powell now, can you give me the origin of your quotation? Stone walls do not a prison make.
It's one of those Cavalier poets.
Yes.
Nor iron bars a cage. Lovelace?
Yes. It's Richard Lovelace, Cavalier poet. The poem is called To Althea from Prison. Well, now I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their explanations of how these quotations came into being. And on this occasion, the marks will go to whichever incredible explanation receives the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So, back to Denis Norden and his quotation. The concessions of the weak are the concessions of fear.
Said by Edmund Burke, statesman, orator, all-round good egg. Now, would you believe that I said this at the top of my voice only last week, without a syllable altered, in a trolley bus? The reason why it came into my mind was because I'd just come from a meeting with a man who summoned me to him, and he said, I've heard you on this program on the wireless where it said that you are a member of the society, the RSVP, which is the Royal Society for the Verification of Proverbs, which is a thing I have spoken about at great length on this particular program. It's a sort of society where, you know, I do things like taking a bull into a china shop and seeing, you know, actually what does happen. And he said, we have got out. He said, we specialise in educational toys, and he said, we have got out this do-it-yourself proverb verifying children's kit. He said, I'll show you one. He said, and what's more, he said, I would like you to be the very first customer of it. He said, it's a mere 30 bob, and I'm sure you'd like to own one. And he brought out this small cardboard box and gave it to me. And I opened it, and there were 2 pebbles inside. That's all. So I said, you said this is an educational toy. He said, hours of fun and pleasure and learning all the while. I said, what do you do? He said, well, take 1 stone. Take one of these pebbles. I took one. He said, press it. Press it. I pressed it, you know. He said, stamp on it. I stamped on it. He said, put your full weight on it. I did. He said, well, you imagine a child doing that. So I said, well, teach him what? There's no blood, is there? So I said, no. No, I said, but, you know, that would hardly occupy a healthy child for any length of time. I said, of course not. The child's got to have exercise. Exercise, got to get out in the open air. Take this pebble. Child can take this pebble up to the top of one of your hills, a high spot. Put it at the top. Let it roll. Follow it down, the little legs, the little muscles tightening. The sun shining on it. Get to the bottom, pick it up. No moss. Child finds out for himself this way, you see. I said, I think you're onto something here. Just tell me, I said, you have 2 pebbles in this. He said, yes. The other one serves not only as a spare or replacement, because children do lose things. He said, also in itself, just by being there, it teaches the child the verification of another proverb. There is more than 1 pebble on the beach. I said, I'll take it. I paid over the 30 bob. And I was rushing it over to Frank Muir to show him this bargain. And I was sitting in that trolley bus, and I was looking at it, and it suddenly occurred to me I'd paid 30 bob for a small cardboard box with 2 pebbles inside. And it was at this moment of realization that I suddenly proclaimed the concessions of the weak are the concessions of fear. And when the arresting officer asked me why I had chosen this particular statement of this particular eminent 18th century politician, I said, because it was at this point that I realized that I, too, have been a bit of a Burke.
Well, it solves my Christmas present problem, and I'm very glad to hear it. Well, now back to Frank Muir, and if you remember, his quotation was, "Stone walls do not a prison make."
I'm not really terribly anxious to get home tonight because, well, my wife isn't speaking to me. We're having what we call a coolth. You see, when I do something frightful, my wife doesn't hurl things at me. She just does, we don't talk. And I'm in one at the moment, you know. It's terrible, really. Actually, today is my wife's birthday. That's the trouble. She's 40... she's fortunately going to have a... Well, she knows I always give her a present. Well, actually, I don't always give her a present, to be quite honest. I usually give her a gift. You see, I have a very old-fashioned attitude towards giving presents. Rather generous, you might think. But I believe in that old maxim that it's better to give than to receive. So I like to ration my giving, just so that I don't get all the pleasure. You see? But I'm quite generous. I let her give us and get the pleasure for my birthdays. But on her birthdays, I like to give her a gift every 9 years and a present every 10, because there's a whale of a difference between a gift and a present. A gift is something fundamentally unnecessary, fundamentally useless, and it's bought in a shop marked gift shop. Actually, a couple of years back, I did give my wife quite a useful gift. It was one of those sort of gimmick writing things, you know, that writes underwater and doesn't leak on planes and you don't have to refill for months. It's called a pencil. But it was marked Happy Birthday. It's the initials, HB. But on the other hand, a present, this every 10-year present, has got to be something really sort of... A present is a present. It's useful. It's good. It brings a glow to the cheek of the receiver. It's a thing like one of those sort of super electric sewing machines, you know, where the needle dances a little hornpipe, you know, and you get a buttonhole, whether you wanted one or not. That's a present. Now this, you see, this birthday, my wife's birthday today, I had one all lined up, actually. I had this local chap who had the most beautiful little bedside clock. It was a French carriage clock. It was absolutely lovely, and I made a deal with this chap because my wife wanted, I knew she wanted something for the bedroom, something feminine, something which suited her, and this seemed ideal. I went to collect it yesterday, and unfortunately, it had started going again, and he'd raised the price. And there I was yesterday with no present for today. And as I was walking back across the village, I suddenly noticed a poster that there's an old water mill near us, and they were having an auction there of the contents. Not only the milling equipment, but it said also the house effects, bedroom furniture and effects. I thought, that's it. So yesterday afternoon I nipped along there, and it was absolutely full of people bidding. And I saw an attendant in a brown coat, so I grabbed him and said, come with me, because I don't know these auctions. And we went into the crowded room, and I looked round, and this chap, I could hear him, he was auctioneering the actual grindstones, you know, these sort of 8 feet granite things which churn the thing up. And I looked around the room, and suddenly I noticed, just above my head, a copper warming pan. I said to the chap, that's just the thing. And in my excitement, I pointed up at it. Now, when you're at an auction, it is most essential that you don't raise your right hand. Well, I bought it, a pair of 8-foot granite grinding wheels, grindstones, £42.15. I got a lorry and got them home, put them into the garage, and this morning, when my wife woke up, I said, I've got your present. She said, is it something feminine? Is it me? And I walked her into the garage, 2 8-foot grindstones. So, as I say, there's a cool-thon at the moment. So, gentlemen, do be careful in auctions. I mean, don't buy things like this. Believe me, I mean, they may sort of scrape by as a gift. But I do assure you, stone wheels do not a present make.
Well, by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Denis Norden wins the contest of the 2 stories, but nevertheless, the other team, Dilys, Powell and Frank Muir, win the whole contest, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Dilys Powell, Frank Muir, Anne Scott James, and Denis Norden. Round 1 tries to test their respective vocabularies. 2 marks if they get the meaning of these words right. Dilys, we start with you. What is malversation?
I think it's bad conversation. Evil communications corrupt good manners.
Well, corrupting good manners is quite true, but the conversation I'd leave out.
Oh, well, just corrupting good manners. Leaving out the conversation.
One and a half, I think, out of 2. It's corrupt behaviour when you're in a position of trust, when people expect you to behave well, or corrupt administration of public money and so on. Curious enough, there's no such word as bonversation, so everybody must be corrupt. 1.5.
Or medium versation.
No, not even there, as far as I know. Denis Norden, what is a bonce? B-O-N-C-E.
Well, it's a Cockney word meaning where your titfer reposes.
That's the slang. There is a perfectly sort of straight meaning as well as the slang one.
Bonds is a Japanese chieftain of some kind.
Yes. Or I give you a 2 marks in case you know too much, I think. But quite apart from the schoolboy slang, where bonce is either your head or the hat you wear on it, bonce was a large playing marble in days when people did play marbles. Anne Scott James, what is ombrology? O-M-B-R-O-L-O-G-Y. Ombrology.
Something to do with the shade. It must be the study
No,
of shadows.
that's a dead end. Or
Is it?
Red herring, or whatever you call it.
Really now? Showers.
Yes, that's more like it.
Is it a meteorological word?
Yes.
A study of rainfall, I should think.
Absolutely
then.
right. Well done. 2 marks. Ombrology is the study of rain, comes from a Greek word, ombros, meaning rain. Frank Muir, what is hydrocephalus? Hydrocephallus.
Don't know, please may I be excused? Hydro means water.
Yes.
Cephalic is something to do with the head.
Yes.
It's a Greek shower.
From the brain or something. Say about water on the brain.
I think your partner knows.
No, it's not, is it?
I think isn't it water on the brain?
Yes, absolutely right. Hydrocephalus, 2 marks, is water on the brain. Just like that. Well, before we begin round 2, I give each team a quotation for them to write down. And then I want the 2 women members of the team to go on studying those quotations during the rest of the programme, because at the end I shall ask them where the quotations come from. And first of all, the quotation for Dilys Powell and Frank Muir is, he fills a chair. He fills a chair. And Anne Scott James and Denis, yours is, how they brought the good news from Ghent to Aix. And then at the end of the programme I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their idea of how these came to be said or written. Well, round 2 is a round of sort of odds and ends. 2 marks for correct answers. Dilys Powell, what are the primary colours and why are they so called?
Red.
Yellow.
Yellow. Blue.
But why are they called primary?
Well, I think if you mix them with other colours, they turn to something else.
Yes, but what happens to them?
The fundamental colours.
The fundamental colours, yes.
You can't get them.
Oh, can't get them by mixing else.
The primary colours, and they're sometimes called the simple or fundamental colours, are those that can't be obtained by mixing other colours. And normally, in a painterly sense, they're red, yellow and blue. Though originally, some people said they were red, green and violet. I never quite understood that. Secondary colours are those that you can produce by mixing these primary colours, 2 or more of them. 2 marks. Denis Norden, what are the cardinal virtues?
Well, they can't be obtained by mixing. I don't know what they were. They used to be things like prudence and fortitude and thrift.
Thrift,
I would have put thrift.
1, I think, out of 2. The 4 natural cardinal virtues are justice, prudence, temperance, and fortitude, of which Denis got 2. But there are also the 3 theological cardinal virtues, which are the old friends, faith, hope, and charity. 1 out of 2, I think, is right. Anne Scott James, who was Trimalchio?
Trimalchio's banquet.
Yes.
Petronius,
yes,
the Satyricon,
yes,
and he was an enormously wealthy Roman who gave absolutely disgusting banquets, which people came and ate for hours and lay around on couches.
Yep, I couldn't better the description. Absolutely right. 2 marks. Now, Frank, if we forget the use of the word as meaning a pastry confection, what is a tart and why? And why?
What's a tart and why? A tart is a board, a doxy. A lady whose mouths are so loose they probably dropped off altogether.
Yes, that's good. Good enough for definition. But why does it come to mean that?
It's the opposite of a maid of honour.
Highly ingenious. It means a girl of loose morals, but almost certainly it's simply a shortening down of sweetheart. And so originally it wasn't used rudely at all, and I believe that I should probably be contradicted. If you go to Australia, you can call a girl a tart without impugning her morals in this way. It means a sweetheart. But I'm not certain about that one.
I'll tell you what, Jack, go out and try it.
We'll wait.
I can't help thinking the dictionary may be a little less accurate than sort of normal current Australians. I don't know. Well, now we have a round of origins and derivations, and I try to give 3 marks if members of the 2 teams can, first of all, define the present meaning, and then give me the origin and derivation of these words or expressions or phrases. Beginning with Dilys Powell, the sting is in the tail.
Well, it means that when you get to the end of the action or the incident or the story, you get the bad bit.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Stings in the tail.
Yes, and what do you think it comes from?
I think it comes from not a hornet.
No, something even worse.
Scorpion.
Yes.
Scorpion.
Well done. Absolutely right. 3 marks it is. Well, yeah, sorry, tell me what the scorpion does.
Well, a scorpion turns its tail over its back to sting you. It's very describable.
And does what, then?
It can sting itself, and you frequently find it under your pillow in Mediterranean countries.
But in...
you die.
In extremis, what does the scorpion do?
Well, it can kill itself.
Yes, all right, fine. Yes, that's what I wanted. Sting is in the tail usually means if there's a speech or a declaration which seems to be going awfully well, the last sentence changes the whole complexion of it really rather nastily. Like, say, a Chancellor's budget speech in which he gives away certain little things to start with and then claps on 5 shillings onto the income tax in the last sentence. It's that sort of thing. And it does come from the scorpion, which has this particularly deadly sting in its tail, and the story is that when it's in a real corner and can't get out, it turns its sting over and stings itself to death. Now, Denis Norden, hello, ducks.
Hello, ducks. What is the present-day meaning of hello, duck? Well, it's a phrase very much used by bus conductresses.
And ganders.
Yes.
And sweethearts.
The origin...
Doesn't come from that silly poem about come and dilly dilly, does it, that one?
No, not Mrs. Bond.
No. Well,
Mrs. James.
we're much given as a nation to using poultry as terms of endearment.
My chick.
Chick. You talk about a chick. What other poultry is there?
My darling partridge.
Yes, you often hear that. My darling partridge. Eric Partridge often uses that very often. You'll find that if you look it up in Partridge. Yeah. And so ducks, being another branch of the poultry species, it would seem to be entirely logical.
I think it's a corruption of DUX, ducks. Let's try that.
Yes, it's a corruption of DUX, which is
leader.
Latin. Yes, Dux Ducis.
Come here, my leader, my lord and master.
Yeah.
I'll give it 2.5, because it is just possible it comes from just duck, and hello, ducks is sort of corruption of that, because duck goes right back to Shakespeare and times and beyond. But more probably, it started not by being a compliment at all, because ducks is the same as the word doxy, which means a wench, and particularly the wench of a tramp or a tinker or slut.
Or tart. Here we are.
Anyway, 2.5. Hello, ducks.
I wonder if those bus conductors know, but when they come up to you, there's actually saying, hello, slut.
Yes. Some bus conductors, I think, probably do know.
Yes.
This repetition of loose women on this programme can only be described as tautology.
I bet the next thing will be a quotation from Trollope.
No luck, because the next one for Anne Scott James is barbarian.
Oh, barbarian just means a brutish, savage creature.
Yes.
And it originally meant anybody who was not a Greek.
And why, Anne? There's a particular reason here.
Is there now?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it just means a sort of non-citizen. Barbarous, coming from the rough shores, coming from...
No.
Oh, I know. It's
Yeah.
come to me. Because they were supposed to be practically inarticulate. They
That's
just
right.
went ba 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 ba, rhubarb,
That's it.
rhubarb.
That's it. Absolutely right. Well done. Three marks to Anne. Now, Frank Muir, the coast is clear.
It's a thing that, in legend, farmers' wives whisper to commercial travellers. I've forgotten what the question is now.
Present meaning and origin.
Present meaning, it's go ahead. There's no danger.
Yeah.
More or less the original meaning. The coast is clear, presumably a Coast Guard thing.
Yes, he's not there, but who's not wanting him to be there?
The coast is clear. Is it Dr. Sin country? Yeah, smugglers.
Yep.
Heard much in Rye.
That's all right. 3 marks. Coast is clear nowadays means no danger of interference or being stopped or put off in any way, but it comes straight from smuggling. The coast is clear meant there just weren't any coast guards about, and therefore were to land your illegal cargo. Well, now we come to the last round and go back to those 2 quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme. 2 marks, Dilys Powell. Can you give me the origin of your quotation? He fills a chair.
Said by Johnson, Dr. Johnson, about Lord North.
Yes, this is Samuel Johnson talking about Lord North, who was Prime Minister at the time we lost the American colonies, and Johnson didn't think very much of that. He fills a chair. Anne Scott James, the origin of yours, please. How they brought the good news from Ghent to Aix.
Well, it's the title of a poem by Robert Browning.
Mm-hmm. It's the one that starts, I galloped, Dirk galloped, we galloped all 3, and there was a horse with a rather improbable name of Roland in it, and they saved the lives of the people. Again, 2 marks. And now I'm going to ask Frank and Denis to give me their explanations of how these quotations came into being, and on this occasion, the marks will go to whichever incredible explanation receives the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So, back to Frank Muir and his quotation, he fills a chair.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, tonight I'm going to try something which has never been attempted on this or any other programme of the same name. I shall attempt, during the next few minutes, to bring in this phrase, he fills a chair. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, but 5 times in as many minutes. I want utter rush in all parts of the house. Slightest movement, I may do myself an injury. I have to think so fast that no company will insure me. 5 times in as many minutes, go. My story starts. It's the story of the latter part of my life, really. When I joined the Royal Air Force in 1940, it was rather brief medical, because we were all rather queuing up, and they had to get them through rather quickly. You know, one doctor looked in one ear, and there was another doctor look in the other ear, and as long as they didn't see each other, you know. And in fact, my medical examination was all summed up in one sentence. He fills a jar. One down, 4 to go. For some years, I fought, mainly in Manchester, for my country. I was actually a UT pilot for 6 years, which is, I think, a record. I had a dirty white flash in 6 years. But they wouldn't let me be a pilot for psychological reasons, apparently. I went to Kingsway House, and the Air Ministry was then, and I was examined by a psychologist, and apparently I had some kind of immature development. He said I apparently was not quite an extrovert and not quite an introvert, and he said this man somehow at the moment doesn't feel either a closed book or an open chapter. He wrote down, he feels a jar.
Twice.
2, 3 to go. At the end of the war, I decided to cash in on this and go to this extrovertial side of my nature. I decided to enter show business. I wanted to be on the BBC, something connected with broadcasting, and I auditioned as a singer. Only a rose. I sang. I bring you. I carried on. Only a rose. Afterwards, they asked, what sort of effect my voice had. And they said, the adjudicator said, he fouls each ear. Three gone. Two, are you keeping score? 2 to go. Right. And so I decided singing was out, that I better be an announcer because that's safe. And a terribly nice man, sort of I did the oath which all announcers have to take, that I'll be clean in thought, word and script. Always leave the wash basin as I would wish to find it. And then I did my test, and I did South Cones have been hoisted in areas Dover, and that was fine. And then they faced me with this pronunciation thing, and I wasn't too bad on that, and the vowels were a bit ragged, weren't too bad. And they said, would you read this? And I read... round and round the rugged rocks, the ragged rascal ran. And of course, I didn't get the job because the John Snagg, who it was then, who was doing examinations, said his consonants aren't too bad and he copes with his vowels, but he fails each R. 4, 1 to go. And then it was I joined Denis Norden as partner, and we started writing scripts. And Denis drew up a simple little contract, just sort of typed it really, just saying that I would be his partner in script writing. And he had a very nice little fancy board around and a tuppenny stamp, And about 3 weeks after we'd started our first Take It From Here script, and I realised that I had to scrub out the office, do Denis's car, and sweep out his house. And it said that this should go on for 50 years or death, whichever was the longest. So for 20 years, I laboured, and it got me down eventually. My knees started to grow red. I started wearing rollers in my hair, and my pinny was never off. And I kept on worrying as to whether my hands were getting roughened by using the wrong soap. And I fell into a terrible decline, and then suddenly I realised I could possibly get out of this contract on medical grounds. So I found this marvellous a doctor who was a specialist in nervous diseases, Dr. Johnson, Samuel Johnson, big fat fellow from Letchworth he was, with a nice little Scotty called Boswell. And Dr. Johnson examined me and said, well, of course, you can break this contract anytime you like, and I'll write you out a prescription because it's affected your mentality. You've ceased to feel a man. He wrote down, this man is in a deep state of neurosis. Trouble is, he no longer feels himself. He feels a char.
By Jove, he's done it. By Jove, he's done it.
I'm sure Dr. Samuel Johnson is turning in his grave because as a Lichfield man, he'd hate to come from Letchworth. Well, now we come to Denis Norden's quotation, how they brought the good news from Ghent to Aix.
I was in the bar at Liverpool Street Station a few weeks ago. Opposite me, there was a girl. She was tall, willowy, blonde, red-lipped, beautiful figure. And yet there was something about her that attracted me. She had on, it was her outfit she was wearing. She had on the most sensational white silk trouser suit. And she looked absolutely gorgeous. And sort of paternally, I leaned across to her and said, "Can I get you anything?" Such as excited, And she said, "No, but I'll have a tomato juice." So, in my best man-of-the-world manner, I went over to the bar, got a tomato juice, came back to her, and with a very suave gesture, I spilt the lot. I don't know whether you've ever seen the effect of a full glass of tomato juice over a white silk trouser suit. It's quite startling, actually. One doesn't realise quite how red tomato juice is and quite how globby. And I must say, she was pretty marvellous about the whole thing. She didn't scream or faint, as a lot of girls would. She simply took a puff on her cigarette and ground it out on my thigh. And I said, I feel I owe you an apology. And she said, do you? And I said, just, but it's all right, because tomato juice doesn't stain. And she looked down at herself at this kind of trickling red all over. And she said, well, what's this then? Pop art? So I said, no, it's all right. Tomato juice does dry out. I know that. In about 10 or 12 hours, you won't see a trace of that. And she said, 10 or 12 hours? She said, in 20 minutes, I have to catch a train to Cambridge. It's 8th week, and my fiancé is stroking a boat. Which I thought, under the circumstances, was rather an odd thing to have chosen to stroke. I said, well, that's all right. I said, if you, we can do it in time. If I can get that trouser suit to a fire or somewhere very hot, we can dry it very quickly. So if you can take it off. She said, take it off. She said, I've got nothing on underneath. I said, nothing? She said, nothing. I didn't say anything. You know, it's difficult when your mouth goes all dry. I said, well, look, I tell you what, then. You go down the ladies and go into one of the things, lock the door, and take it off and give it to some other lady in there and let her bring it up to me, and I'll go and get it dry. She said, this cost 80 guineas. She said, if you think I'm going to hand it to some strange passing kleptomaniac. I said, wait, and I had an idea. I was wearing a Homburg, and I clapped it on this girl's head, and I said, I tell you what, instead of going down the ladies, go down my one. So she said, how? I said, well, look, you've got a Homburg, you've got a white jacket, white trousers, you could easily be taken for a chap. Just be careful not to inhale. And saying which, I rushed her down there, shoved her in one, waited outside, and sure enough, overcame the jacket and the trousers. And so I took the trouser suit down Liverpool Street to a bakery shop, to a baker I knew. I slipped him half a crown, held it in front of the oven there. It's only a matter of minutes, dries ever so quickly, silk, you know, and rushed back to it, and the stain was completely gone. It was white, bright, and smelling very pleasantly of fresh sausage rolls as well. And I came back and I tossed it over the door, of the top of the door, and I said, there you are, darling, put that on, you'll look lovelier than ever. She caught the train with 2 minutes to spare, and I'm sure that her 8th week was very successful, because I got a package from her only 2 days ago saying, I shall never forget what you did. I fortunately wasn't there when it exploded, but for me, this has always been the real meaning of the phrase, how we bought a good nude from the gents to 8s.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, by your vote, Denis Norden wins the contest of the 2 stories, and he and Anne Scott James also win the entire contest. And that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. Round one tries to test their vocabulary. 2 marks if they get the meaning of these words approximately right. And we begin with Anne Scott James. Anne, what is podagra?
Pod, something to do with a foot.
Mm-hmm.
Big foot, painful foot. It's a foot disease called gout.
That's absolutely right. Podagra is gout. It very literally means something that catches you by the foot, which is fairly literally true, I think. Frank Muir, what is the meaning of solidungular?
Solidungular. Euler is having the characteristics of, being similar to, solidung. It's artificial fertilizer.
On an entirely wrong tack, and I can't give any marks, and I'm very sorry. It means solid-hoofed, like a horse rather than a cow. Equine, if you like. Now, to this power, what is balneology?
Something to do with a hydro, kind of
Yes?
thing. Something to do with water and baths.
Yeah, what to do with them?
Science of baths.
Yes?
I have a bath without any science.
I think that'll do it. It's the scientific study of curative baths and medicinal springs.
That's why it's the Bishop of Bath and Wells.
It's absolutely right, provided they were curative wells. Denis Norden, what is the meaning of cribriform?
Well, it means shaped like.
Yes?
And I'll take half a mark for that. And I'll come back next week. Shaped like cribe. Cribe. Would it be short for the Caribbean?
Not like a cradle, is it? No.
But you're getting...
Shaped like a cradle.
No, it's
Very
not right.
good.
No.
I get by with a little help.
If you think
from
if you think what Moses' cradle was made of, it might help you.
Bulrushes.
Bulrushes.
Was it made of bulrushes?
Yes?
Rush-shaped.
Rush shaped.
No,
yes.
I'm sorry, I've slightly
Told us
misled.
too much, we haven't
That's
got it.
right,
Oh.
No, I've misled you a bit. I give Dennis's half mark for knowing it was shaped like something, but what it is, in fact, is having small holes like a sieve. It's mainly used in botany and anatomy, and it comes from a Latin word just meaning a sieve, just like that. Well, before we begin round 2, I give each team a quotation for them to write down, and I want the 2 women members of the team to go on studying those quotations, because at the end of the programme I shall ask them where the quotations come from. Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, your quotation is, money is the root of all evil. And Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, yours is, eureka. And then at the end of the programme I shall ask Denis and Frank to tell me how these came to be said or written. The second round is a round of odds and ends, 2 marks for correct answers. Anne Scott James, all the Greek gods had chariots when they needed them, which were drawn by special kinds of creatures. For instance, Bacchus was drawn by panthers or pards, and Diana was drawn by stags, and Pluto, the god of the underworld, was drawn by black horses.
It was drawn by Walt Disney.
What I'd like to know is what creatures were the chariots of Juno and Neptune drawn by?
Junos were drawn by peacocks.
Absolutely right. Well done.
Who was the other?
Neptune.
Well,
Potted
the
shrimps.
underwater stuff.
Drawn by
Sea serpent.
1.5 out of 2. Anne Scott James is quite right. Juno's chariots were drawn by peacocks. They were one of the sacred birds, including geese and ravens, who were attached to Juno. Neptune was drawn by seahorses, because he was god not only of the sea, but of horses as well.
That was not clever of us, was it?
I think potted shrimps is much nicer. I can't give any marks for it. 1.5. Frank Muir, where would you find Molly Seagrim, Sophia Weston, and Lady Bellaston, and what had they all in common?
Common's a good word. They can all be found between the sheets of Henry Fielding's novel Tom Jones.
Yeah.
They were all ladies he encountered in his picaresque journeys.
That's absolutely right. These are all characters in Fielding's novel Tom Jones, and what they all had in common was Tom Jones himself. Well, now Dilys Powell. Dilys, what is the liberty of the press?
Well, short of blasphemy and treason
Yes,
and libel,
yes,
to make critical remarks, attack anything you please.
yeah, that's absolutely right. 2 marks. Denis Norden, who was Casanova?
Casanova was an Italian
Yes.
who lived in the 18th century and wandered Europe in search of a little peace. And then he wrote his memoirs all about them.
Giacomo Casanova da Sango, who was an Italian adventurer, and he wrote these very extensive memoirs, and very frank memoirs too, and they describe his rogueries and adventures and loves in nearly the whole of Europe. That's
The best
Casanova.
translation, if you want to get a copy, is by Arthur Machen.
Yes. And then we have a round of verse and poetry, and what I do in this round is to give each member of each team a quotation and ask them to try and complete it by the next line or two. 2 marks if they can finish off the quotation, and 2 more for correctly naming the source. Anne Scott James. I met a traveller from an antique land who said...
This is Ozim...
Yes.
Mandia's King of Kings.
Yes. Written by...
Oh, that's a nasty one, isn't it?
He was one
It's
of
not Byron, is it?
No.
No.
Contemporary.
It's...
Oh, wait a moment, that leaves us a
Shelley.
choice of...
Shelley, is it?
Yes.
Shelley.
Shelley, yes, we've got that half of it. Can you go on with the quotations? Well, I met a traveller from an antique land who said... He describes what he saw.
He describes the Sphinx, doesn't he? He describes...
Well, you invented.
Well,
Out Shelley,
there's
Shelley.
this big thing in the desert. And I kept standing outside it saying, here, puss, here, only put poetic-like, as they do.
I think 2.5 out of 4. It's a poem by Shelley called Ozymandias. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command, etc., etc. And it goes on. Finally, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. But there wasn't very much left. 2.5. Frank Muir. There was a sound of revelry by night, and Belgium's capital had gathered then.
Eve of the Battle of Waterloo.
Yes, quite right.
The ball.
Yes.
And somebody wrote about it, didn't they?
Yeah.
This is what we've got to find out. Fanny Burney wrote about it.
She did, but
She
in
was
prose.
there. She wasn't asked to the ball, but she was in prose.
It's a very long poem. This is only one episode in it, and...
Oh, is this sort of Canto 42,
yes, that's it.
isn't it?
That's what I want.
We think it might be Byron.
Yes, quite right. Do you remember the poem?
Hmm?
The actual name of the poem?
Don Juan in Brussels.
They're rather more juvenile than that.
Child Harold.
Yes, I helped a bit here. I'm not quite certain what to give you. 2.5 again, I think. It's Byron, The Eve of Waterloo, which Frank got quite right, and it is in Canto 3 of Childe Harold, and it runs this bit. There was a sound of revelry by night, and Belgium's capital had gathered then, her beauty and her chivalry, and bright the lamps shone o'er fair women and brave men. Now, Dilys Powell, Weave a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread.
For he on honeydew hath fed and drunk the milk of paradise.
Well done. And?
It's Coleridge and it's Kubla Khan.
Well done. 4 marks. Now, Denis Norden. The wild vine slipping down leaves bare her bright breast shortening into size. The wild vine slips with the weight of its leaves, but the buried ivy catches and cleaves.
I think it's Swinburne.
Quite right.
Now, is it the long one?
Yes.
No, well, good. It starts, or somewhere up near the beginning, is the hounds of spring are on winter's traces.
Absolutely right, yes. Title?
Atalanta in Caledon?
Caledon.
Caledon, yes.
Well done, Dennis. 3 out of 4. You haven't got the next 2 lines, but that's jolly good. Swinburne's Atalanta in Caledon. This is a chorus from this long poem. This particular bit goes, the wild vine slips with the weight of its leaves, but the buried ivy catches and cleaves to the limbs that glitter, the feet that scare, the wolf that follows, the fawn that flies. And now we have a round of initials and abbreviations. Again, 2 marks. Anne Scott James, small letters, lowercase, QV. Full stop between each. QV.
Oh, something vide, isn't it? Quad vide or videte.
Yes.
QV page something or other means look on page 44.
Yes, that's all right. Well done. 2 marks. It comes from Latin quod vide, which means which see, that you can find a cross-reference to it in the textbook or encyclopedia which you're studying. Frank Muir, the R, capital R, the R months.
They're the months in which we eat oysters. In other words, you don't eat them in the months without R's.
Which are? I'm sorry, which...
Well, April, May, June...
Non-April.
No, April.
Well, when I say... I don't pronounce R in April. May, June, July, August, Sept. May, June, July, August.
That's it. Absolutely right. Never eat an oyster unless there's an R in the month. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, G-man, capital G. G-man.
G-man, that's something to do with America.
Mm-hmm.
Something to do with the sort of federal police.
Federal...
Bureau
Yes.
of Investigation.
That's right. And who are these chaps in it?
They're the tough ones who go out and shoot people.
They cross state lines.
They cross state lines, Frank says.
1.5. And G-man is a government man. He's an agent of the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In other words, he's not employed by one of the states, but by the central federal government. And they're the chaps who are supposed to look after particularly tough and big kinds of criminals. 1.5. Denis Norden, capital M.
Monsieur.
M.
Monsieur.
If it has a full stop, it's there, but without a full stop.
Ah. Oh, then it's Latin.
Yes.
It's Latin.
Something in chemistry, is it?
No, Dennis is right.
Latin for 1,000, isn't it?
Absolutely right. 2 marks. Well, now we come to the last round and go back to those 2 quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme. For 2 marks, Anne Scott James, can you give me the origin of your quotation? Money is the root of all evil.
I must say I always thought it was the love of money. This is interesting.
Yes? You're right for the
It comes from the Old Testament, I think from the Psalms.
No, not Old Testament. At any rate, I'll give you something for that. No, you're quite right by the original.
There's a song, there's a very syncopated song which goes, money is at the root of all evil.
That's right.
Can you sing it?
Yeah.
I have no voice.
I think you'll get your 2 marks. The original phrase is the love of money is the root of all evil, which comes in St. Paul's first epistle to Timothy in the Bible, but then much, much later, there was a song written by Alex Kramer and Joan Whitney called Money is the Root of All Evil, but the phrase, or more or less the phrase, also occurs in Samuel Butler and Erewhon. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, can I have the origin of your quotation? Eureka.
Well, it's a Greek story. There was somebody called Archimedes.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough, it was Archimedes, and he's alleged to have said, Eureka, I've found it.
And he was sitting in his bath studying balneology.
when I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their explanations of how these quotations came into being, and on this occasion the marks will go to whichever unlikely explanation receives the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Denis Norden and money is the root of all evil.
I have to make a rather uncomfortable confession here. I wasn't very bright when I was at school. I was 14 before I discovered that the dictionary was in alphabetical order. I spent 3 weeks once looking up the word zoological. I don't think... It's funny, you know, these things happen with children. I think it dates back to the first day I went to school. My very first nursery school. I was led into this strange room with all these strange children by this strange teacher and sat at a strange desk. And the teacher said, all you have to do is sit there, and all you have to remember is if you want to be excused, put your hand up. And I remember thinking, will that stop it? And because we sort of got off to this wrong start, school and I sort of fought it all the way, and quite regularly, term after term, bottom of the class. Maths papers, always, they were sent home, you know, Frankie and Johnny written on, because, you know, they just got tired of writing, he done them wrong, you know. You see, but the point about the English scholastic system is that you can't beat it indefinitely, because there comes a time when you have to go in for a thing called the A-level in order to get into university, you see. And I saw that I didn't have a chance. You see, first of all, I still am, actually, temperamentally incapable of entering any examination. In my whole life, the only test in which I ever got more than 70% was with a breathalyzer. And so this A-level presented quite a problem to me, and I thought, well, there's only one thing to do, that's pull up my socks and get down to some really hard, laborious, grinding cheating. That was the only other subject I was any good at, you see. Now, I'd established some rules for cheating, such as always sit behind round-shouldered kids, you know, because you can see over better. And I thought, what I'll do is I'll sit next to somebody who's bright. You see, well, now, I knew who I was sitting next to because you went alphabetically, you see, and so N, and there was this chap whose name began with M, and he was a swot, you know, he was a real sort of teacher's pet. You know, but we had a teaching machine as well there, and at the end of the term he used to bring it a lens cleaner, you know. And so I thought I'll come to a financial arrangement with him to copy his paper, you see, which I did. And I gave him my cricket bat, my 3-speed motorbike, my copy of Casanova's memoirs, translated by Arthur Macon. He never forgot that. Isn't that strange? 10 shillings a week for life. And in return for that, he let me copy his paper. Now, it was an absolutely foolproof scheme, and there's absolutely no reason why today I should not have been a graduate of Oxford or Cambridge, or possibly both. Except I was overzealous. You see, I over-cheated, as it were, because when I say I copied every word, I copied every word. So that my papers went into the examiners with Frank Muir written on top. Nevertheless, I would still say that to pass any examination easily and painlessly, there is no substitute for bribery. Or as the song has it, money is the root of A-level.
Well, we're entering Dennis again next year, and then moving over entirely to science fiction. We hope you'll do better. Well, now, back to Frank Muir, and if you remember, his word, rather than quotation, was Eureka.
The other day, the second hand fell off my watch, and I wandered into Virginia Water, the nearest village, to buy another one from a second-hand shop. And while I was there, it started raining, and I had a cap on, so I took from my pocket my new plastic cover to stop the cap getting wet. And as it was, the cover was new, I didn't want to get that wet. So I put the evening paper I bought over that. And I realized I didn't want to get the evening paper wet because I hadn't read it yet. So I popped into the public library until the rain stopped. And in order to stop looking at the girl behind the counter, I picked up a book and browsed through it. And the book was entitled All There Is to Know About Ancient Greece. And I read it. So I thought I'd tell you in the 6 minutes all there is to know about ancient Greece, because this chap comes into it, you see. Do you know that nothing is new, you know? The Greeks had it all, disc jockeys. You know, Socrates was the first disc jockey, because apparently he used to hold little gatherings called disc horses. So he must... There was... he had a friend, Diogenes. He was a barrel of fun. And there was a... and, of course, there was the ruler at that time, was the great conqueror, Alexander, you know, and he was so tired of people just sort of burning their fires on the floor and letting the smoke get through the ceiling that he invented this thing of putting it up on a little thing of bars of iron, and so you got better draft. And even now, I mean, Alexander the Great, his name is remembered and revered, but possibly the best of the inventors, the inventor's inventor, the one that they all looked to invent things, was their friend Medes, like the Medes and the Persians, this fellow Medes. Now, he was busy inventing a rather silly device, rather like an enormous screw, which you lowered into a little stream, and you turned it, and it sort of carried water high up and deposited it for irrigation purposes a few feet higher. And he was playing around with this thing all day, and used to get filthy, slopping around in the mud. They used to call him Aki. Anyway, Archimedes used to get home at night and always had to have a bath, you see, to get all this muck off. And Aki used to have this bath, and he used to notice that when he sat in the bath water used to come up. And when he got up, it used to sink down. Surely there's an invention for me here, he said to himself, in Greek, which is even clever. And he wondered whether there was anything to do with the weight of his body. So he thought, I know my own weight, which was 15 stone 2. They were a portly lot, you know, those philosophers. And if I could measure how much water I displaced, so he thought to himself, now, if I fill the bath to the brim and put a whole lot of pots and things round, and I lie in the bath, and it all slops over the side the way it does, and I weigh how much water is in the pots, perhaps there's a correlation between my weight and that, which is what he did. Now, Alexander the Great was terribly kind, and he helped all these philosopher chappies, you see, and because they had no money. You can't make any money inventing screws. So he'd given Archimedes the room above the stable, the royal stable, where Alexander kept his racing chariot. And the floor was of mud. I want you to bear that in mind. The floor was of mud, you see, and the bath was above that. So, and also that although the normal 8 inches of water in a bath weighs about 300 weight, if you fill the bath right to the top, it weighs about 9 ton. Well, Aki filled the bath right up to the top, you see, put all his amphora and vases and jugs all the way around the lip of the bath, and in he dove. There was an almighty splash and a tidal wave, and the water not only went into the amphora and the jugs and the pots, but slopped all over the clay floor, Well, of course, what happened, you can guess. The weight of this 9 tons of water, plus Aki, 15 stone, do your own sums, if you will. Well, the whole lot descended into the stable beneath, and the bath crushed down, completely destroying Alexander's racing chariot, which was a tall, noble vehicle built of cloth of gold and leather and wood. It didn't go very fast because the wind used to catch it. The bath fell right on top of this, demolishing it, and lodged twixt the 2 wheels. Of course, there's a terrible commotion, cries of "Uck, uck, uck," which I believe is a Greek expression for "oh, oh, oh." And Alexander came rushing out and said, "What is happening therein, within the royal stable?" And Archimedes looked at this thing. There was the 2 wheels, and there was this low bath between them, and he said, "I have invented the first really efficient racing vehicle, because it's low-slung, it's streamlined and white. It's an E-type chariot I've got." And Alexander opened the doors and saw this mess, and saw uckers, starkers. And he said, "What's this? What is this thing here, this white thing?" And Archimedes said very proudly, "Sir, you're Ika."
Well, ladies and gentlemen, by your vote, Frank Muir wins the contest of the 2 stories, but nevertheless, Anne Scott James and Denis Norden win the entire contest, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC.